The Minotaur, half man and half bull, victor and victim. Pablo Picasso's favorite symbol for himself. A creature of the light and a creature of the shadows, its home is the labyrinth and its fate is death. Every act of creation, said Picasso, is first of all an act of destruction. The hand of the artist is the hand of the matador. Picasso said his first love, Fernand Olivier, had a nature that sought its own torment. Barcelona and a literary cafe called the Four Cats. Already in 1900 it was inhabited by writers and poets, musicians and painters, among them the young Pablo Picasso. Picasso impressed his friends by sketching them in the fashionable cafe style of Toulouse-Lautrec. We spoke of him, one of his sitters later remembered, as a legendary hero. And that was how Picasso drew himself. Only 19, yet already his eyes seemed to have stared into the darkness of the world. Science and Charity, which won the gold medal at the Malaga Fine Arts Exhibition of 1897. Picasso was 16 when he painted it. His father posed as the doctor. This was to be the first of the many deathbeds by which the young Picasso stood. Coruña, cold and wet, a town Picasso detested. His sister, Maya de la Concepcion, died here of diphtheria at the age of 8. His family came here when Picasso was 10. His father was professor of art at the local academy. The Academy of Fine Arts, where Picasso was enrolled as a student in 1892. So quickly did he learn that at the age of 14 his father bequeathed to him his palette and brush, and according to legend swore never to paint again. At the age of 14, said Picasso, I drew like Raphael. I never drew like a child. Malaga, where he was born in 1881. Picasso could draw before he could speak. In Malaga, if the wind comes in from the southwest, it's said you can smell the desert. He was 3 years old when his father took him to his first bullfight in the Malaga ring. His first drawings were bullfighting scenes. Many years later, the poet Ramón Gómez was to write, "In Malaga, I found an explanation of what Picasso is, and I understood to what degree he is a matador, and how, whatever he may do, it is in reality bullfighting." 1900, the young matador makes his first visit to Paris. In Coruña, he had learned to draw like Raphael. In Paris, he adopts the style of Toulouse-Lautrec and the brushstrokes of Vincent van Gogh. In 1901, Picasso finds himself at another deathbed. His friend, the poet Casagemas, who'd accompanied him to Paris, commits suicide over a tragic love affair. Picasso mourns him in a flurry of Van Gogh-like brushstrokes. For Picasso, his friend was a victim of the war between the sexes. Casagemas was sexually impotent, taunted and rejected by his lover. He tried first to shoot her. When he missed, he shot himself. Just as Van Gogh had sent his severed ear to the woman who taunted him, so in the bull ring, the victorious matador is traditionally presented with the ear of the conquered bull. Picasso could not bring himself to go to his defeated friend's funeral. It was only months later that he would paint this portrait of Casagemas on his deathbed. Wrapped up in his big winter coat, cold, alone, a sad self-portrait of 1901. It was thinking of Casagemas that made me start painting in blue, Picasso later remembered. The color drained out of his art to be replaced by an exaggerated pity for hungry mothers and their children. When she heard of her son's death, the mother of Casagemas dropped dead from the shock. Haunted faces crowd Picasso's vision. Staring out over the rooftops of Barcelona, he saw only a sad, nocturnal blue. In 1904, blue gives way to pink. The terrors of the previous years find a face in the emaciated figure of the madman. In 1905, the Rose period. Picasso himself is Harlequin. The poet Apollinaire is his fat jester friend. Picasso has found a family of acrobats to accompany him. He begins his first great love affair with Fernand Olivier. They set up home together. A new serenity enters his art. The dark ghosts of the blue years will return to haunt their maker, but for the time being, their era is over. Picasso always claimed that he could look directly into the sun. 1906, Gozol in the Spanish Pyrenees. The sunlight begins to stream into Picasso's art. He was back in his native Spain, among people he knew and faces he recognized. In Paris, Picasso had seen an exhibition of primitive Iberian sculptures. He is amazed by the simple geometry of the figures, the fierce expressiveness of the faces. The willowy nude boys of his Rose period solidify suddenly into painted wood. A self-portrait of 1906. Picasso becomes Picasso. A square for his torso, a cylinder for his neck, an oval mask for his head. 2 pieces of coal for his eyes. Picasso comes to Gozol in the summer of 1906, accompanied by Fernand Olivier. It was to be a momentous holiday. Away from the shifting, ephemeral world of modern Paris, with Spanish soil under his feet and a Spanish sun over his shoulder, in the clear Pyrenean light, Picasso could see clearly again. Rooftops as solid as sunlit rocks. To see things as they are, that was the ambition Picasso set himself. In these faces, inspired by Iberian sculptures, Picasso seems to have scraped away the surface of the modern human being to discover the ancient ancestor within us all. A fierce nude. She seems to have been carved roughly out of wood. The knife marks remain. a disguised self-portrait of 1907. As a boy, his mother had dressed him up in a sailor's suit. To have a direct vision, he said, that is the thing. Another child with its mother. This time, the idyllic scene is fraught with ancient terrors. In years to come, Picasso would claim to have African blood in him through his Spanish Moorish ancestors. But in June 1907, the real moment of epiphany. In the ethnography collection of the Trocadero Museum, Picasso discovers the fetishes, tribal masks, and fertility figures of Africa and the South Seas. At that moment, he later claimed, I realized what painting was all about. Les Demoiselles d'Avignon, a brothel scene, which changed the course of 20th century art. When Picasso's closest associate, Braque, first saw it, he said it was like swallowing paraffin. André Derain warned Picasso, one day we'll find you hanging behind this huge painting. It's such a cursed enterprise. Picasso called it his first exorcism painting. It would protect him against evil female spirits. He was suffering from venereal disease at the time. Horta de Ebro, the Spanish mountains. In 1907, a large memorial exhibition devoted to Cézanne is held in Paris. Picasso and Braque explore Cézanne's manner with a new understanding. Landscape with two figures. Treat everything in nature, said Cézanne, according to the sphere, the cylinder, and the cone. Picasso divides, intersects, separates, and reorganizes the forms of the human head. To paint, he said, is to destroy. The great classicist landscapes, wrote Cézanne, are those where light is spiritualized, where a landscape is a smile flickering with keen intelligence. A facetious critic looking at these new landscapes complains of little houses like cubes. The name sticks. Man with mandolin. He studies the figure, wrote the poet Apollinaire, as a surgeon dissects a corpse. There is no vanishing point, no horizon, no perspective, no beginning, no end, just the hard solidity of space. A humble guitar, seen from the front and the side at once. Picasso. I do not paint what I see, I paint what I know. In African art, Picasso had found a way of exerting a primitive power over the human figure. In his Cubist paintings, he learns how to hold the figure steady, while he examines it from all sides, measuring it, stripping away its surface, cutting into its solidity, rebuilding it. Picasso, we were trying to go in the opposite direction from Impressionism. That is why we abandoned color, emotion, and feelings. We were searching for an architectonic basis capable of restoring order. Out of angles and curves, segments and sections, shallow hollows and protrusions, Picasso assembles a new human figure. Each step, every simplification leads to another. 1912. Picasso, feeling he is losing sight of the visible world, introduces a real fragment of chair caning into a still life. The real is no longer merely represented, it is included. Jean Cocteau. The only pleasures the analytical cubist permits himself are the objects found upon a cafe table. The austere work is executed with the rigor of a mathematical series. A Spanish guitar is taken apart over and over again, then put back together in its exquisitely simple new form. As a challenge to the old art, Picasso introduces a whole range of humble new materials into his collages. Squares of wallpaper, his morning news. It's the most radical change in the artist's way of seeing since the discovery of perspective. By 1913, it seems as if there is nowhere for Cubism to go except into the realm of pure abstraction. But Picasso refuses to take what many consider to be the obvious next step. There is no abstract art, he writes. You must always start with something. Afterward, you can remove all traces of reality, but the object will have left an indelible mark. Wall reliefs, wooden cutouts, guitar-shaped assemblages. Having come so close to destroying the old objects, Picasso begins to create cupboards full of new ones. Where previously he had shattered, he now begins to build. Old instruments find a new form for a new century. A bottle of Bass and an old newspaper rise up from the table like a tottering Eiffel Tower. For the first time, critics begin to speak of Picasso as if he was a magician. The Catalan sculptor Fenosa, passing by the artist's studio, hears Picasso shouting to himself, "I am God, I am God." 1914 to 1916. Picasso returns with a vengeance to painting, cataloguing and recapitulating all the audacious new techniques he has developed. He dedicates a set of pictures to his new girlfriend, Eva. Picasso is happy. The Great War passes him by. A playful exuberance lights up his art. Man with pipe, man with moustache, man with chimney. Suddenly Picasso emerges from his decade of cubism with a characteristically abrupt change of style. To everyone's astonishment, he's become a follower of Ingres. In Olga, Picasso found a companion appropriate to his new social status as a successful and immensely fashionable young artist. By choosing Ingres as his model, he was choosing the most elegant society portraitist of them all. Inveterate hoarder, Picasso kept everything. Olga's dress remained in his private collection. Picasso explained the demise of Cubism. Having understood that collective adventure was a lost cause, each of us went away, alone, like Van Gogh, towards an essentially tragic experience. Not for the last time in his career, Picasso measures himself against the art of the past. A new order enters his art. We have to go back to the Greeks and the Egyptians. We belong to a time in which there is no order or canon enabling us to subject artistic production to rules. The Greeks and Egyptians had that. It's as if Picasso, having watched Europe disintegrate into the Great War, is trying single-handedly to bring order and stillness back into the world. He paints a pair of village dancers. In the heyday of Impressionism, Renoir had brought this same village couple to life. But where Renoir's dancers skip and bounce, Picasso's tragic couple gaze out, immobile. It was Cézanne who said he wanted to make Impressionism an art of the museums. The war over, Picasso sets about putting his own life in order. He marries Olga Koklova. So they stop coming to visit. Picasso finds himself alone. His so-called neoclassical works are imbued with the same gravity, the same massive frontality of the Gozol paintings. Picasso has invented a race of giants. They appear naggingly familiar, but the world has never seen their like before. Picasso. Since Van Gogh, we have all been self-taught. One could almost say primitive painters. The beach at Biarritz. With Olga, Picasso begins a lifelong habit of spending his summers on the beach. Wives and mistresses would come and go, but the sea would always be there. Women bathers watching a plane. Juin Lepin, 1920. Picasso gently mocks his bathers. They bob around in the water like curious sea lions. Already they have begun to resemble the rocks on the beach. It is on the beach that Picasso plays out his greatest classical tragedy, the War of the Sexes. Figures on a Beach, 1931. Has sheer physical passion, asked one critic, ever been made so palpable in paint? Their tongues are like knives, their mouths devour. Their heads are tiny, their passion awesome. Figure throwing a stone. The bather has become an archaic war machine, a Roman catapult. When I paint, I always try to give an image people are not expecting, and beyond that, one they reject. The body of the bather has become indistinguishable from a pile of stones on the beach. Seated woman with a book, a moment of peace on the battleground. Her head is enthroned, her body enormous and immobile. Picasso's bathers, a critic writes, sun themselves like lazy dinosaurs on the beach. In 1921, Olga gives birth to a baby boy, Paolo. At the age of 40, Picasso becomes a father for the first time. On the beach, the neoclassical Holy Family takes a tranquil holiday. Picasso paints Paolo on every birthday until the boy is 4. He paints him as a little harlequin, a miniature version of himself. Later on, Paolo would often be in trouble with the police. In the end, he becomes Picasso's chauffeur. The domestic bliss doesn't last, nor does the neoclassical style. Olga proves to be a difficult and jealous companion. Picasso lashes out at her in a portrait of awesome savagery. Summer, 1925, the kiss. When I love a woman, that tears everything apart, especially my painting. Everybody criticizes me because I've had the courage to live my life in broad daylight, with more destruction than most others. A painting is a sum of destructions. Never before in art has the image of woman been torn apart with such ferocity. Woman in a red armchair. Picasso attacks Olga's bourgeois world with fierce surrealism. He complains to his friends that Olga is always screaming at him. Olga's psychic storms lead her to a nervous breakdown. Picasso paints her as a reptilian vagina dentata. For the first time since his childhood, Picasso chooses a religious subject, the crucifixion. Yet he declares himself a convinced atheist. It's not Christ who is being crucified, it's himself. The colors are the red and yellow of the corrida. The terror reaches a climax in Woman with Stiletto. Based on David's great Death of Marat, the assassin bursts in upon her victim in the bath. She is the now familiar fanged mouth. He is the tiny head she threatens to devour. The bath overflows with blood. The letter remains unfinished. Bullfight, Death of the Matador. For the critic Michel Leiris, the Spanish bullfight was the only truly tragic entertainment surviving in Western Europe. For Picasso, the corrida becomes a ritualistic reenactment of the struggles of life. Picasso had been going to the bullfight since he was 3. He too comments upon its sexual charge. In the ring, the bull is continually replaced. He is everlasting. For Picasso, the bull becomes a symbol of both life and death. If man is the savage bull, then woman becomes a picador's horse, constantly sapping the bull's strength. Every act of creation is, first of all, an act of destruction. A guitar, made from the very floor cloth used to wipe away the blood after Picasso's domestic bullfight with Olga in 1926. Picasso had originally intended to cover it with razor blades. In the end, he pierced it with nails. Another guitar, made this time from a crucified shirt. I want my paintings to be able to defend themselves, to resist the invader, just as though there were razor blades on all surfaces, so no one could touch them without cutting his hands. The Minotaur, the body of a man and the mind of a bull. According to mythology, Athenian youths, boys and girls, are ritualistically sacrificed to assuage the Minotaur's enormous appetite. The Minotaur becomes Picasso's favorite alter ego. The age-old tragedy is given modern dress. Death of the woman bullfighter. Her exposed genitalia tempt the bull's horns. How to escape the terrors of the domestic corrida. Picasso turns once again to the tranquil world of classical antiquity. "You know, I met love," says the tart, the leading female character in Picasso's play Desire Caught by the Tail. "He has scraped knees, and he begs from door to door." Picasso. It's hard to say whether he wants to awaken her or kill her. Picasso. A minotaur keeps his women in luxury, but he reigns through terror, and they are happy to see him die. Warm flesh in one hand, iced champagne in the other. In 1933, the surrealist writer Georges Bataille starts up a new literary magazine. He called it Minotaur. Picasso draws the first cover. The Minotaur, writes Bataille, man-beast, blindly wandering through the labyrinth into which he has fallen. He's dizzy, disorientated, for he has lost his seat of reason, his head. In 1935, Picasso's domestic situation is becoming intolerable. He later describes it as the worst time of my life. In Dante's Inferno, the Minotaur guards the seventh circle of hell. In the greatest of the Minotaur etchings, a young girl leads the creature deeper and deeper into the darkness. Her face is a likeness of Picasso's teenage mistress, Marie-Thérèse Walter. In 1937. The outside world intrudes brutally upon the Minotaur's private hell. German bombers called in by the fascist General Franco attack the Basque town of Guernica. After 3 hours of continuous bombing, Guernica is destroyed. Picasso sides fiercely with the Republicans. He is appointed director of the Prado Museum and commissioned to paint a mural for the Spanish Pavilion in the World's Fair. The result is Guernica. The cast is familiar. The screaming mother and child. The bull, representing forces of brutality and darkness. The savaged horse. Once again, as during his blue period, Picasso all but dispenses with color. In stark black and white, he mourns the tragedy of Spain. Death is always present in the solitudes and caprices of the Spaniards, writes Picasso's friend, the poet Cocteau. While Franco rules, Guernica remains on show in New York. With the dictator's death, Picasso's powerful and enigmatic masterpiece finally returns to Spain. In its grey museum bunker behind bulletproof glass, conditions of war still prevail. Guernica marks the end of the Minotaur cycle. Another had begun in 1926 with The Painter and His Model. Again dispensing with colour, Picasso, the most famous draftsman of the 20th century, sets his line free. It knits itself into mysterious knots and arabesques. It seems to lose its subject. But finally it solidifies into a female foot. Picasso is painting in code. Picasso. Painting is never prose, it is poetry. It is written in verse with plastic rhymes. Plastic rhymes are forms which reverberate among themselves, responding to other forms, or to the space surrounding them. Picasso is commissioned to design a monument to his old friend Apollinaire. The result surprises everyone. It is his most abstract work to date. I want a balance that can be grasped instantly, just like a juggler catching a ball, and not a ready-made balance which sits there inert. Picasso's code becomes more audacious. In 1929, he meets a 17-year-old girl outside a Parisian department store and seduces her. In this joyous still life, he paints a secret portrait of her. Her head is a bowl of fruit, her breasts a pair of ripe, upturned apples. Picasso represents himself as an old jug. Picasso is 50. Marie-Thérèse Walter becomes his greatest model. Captivated by her youth and voluptuousness, he paints her obsessively over and over again. The color surges back into his art. The old painter dispenses with code. His beautiful teenage lover becomes the subject of a charming sequence of portraits. Marie-Thérèse reading. Picasso plays with his model's curvaceous outlines. The plastic rhymes become rhymes of color. Sculpture. The greatest shock. Picasso is inspired to make a series of monumental heads of his young lover. Once again, he goes in search of the primitive. Marie-Thérèse's features are brutally simplified into thick pillows of form. Picasso turns her into an ancient Easter Island head. Marie-Thérèse is a quiet, simple girl. She reads a lot, and she sleeps a lot. She is devoted to Picasso. Once again, he paints her as if she were a basket of luscious fruit ripening in the sun. The idyll can't last. Picasso and Marie-Thérèse carry on their affair furtively, on the beach, in the garden. Picasso cannot bring himself to leave Olga. Marie-Thérèse sleeps on. For me, said Picasso, there are only two kinds of women, goddesses and doormats. The artist's curvaceous model is punished with straight lines. The old picture looks on. The mirror says nothing. But Marie-Thérèse is fated to spend the rest of her life devoted hopelessly to Picasso. Later, when she hears of his death, Marie-Thérèse commits suicide. In 1935-36, Picasso's domestic situation becomes so complex that for the first time in his life he finds he can't paint. He turns instead to writing. The poet Paul Eluard asks for an anonymous analysis to be made of Picasso's handwriting. The graphologist's verdict: this man loves passionately, and he kills that which he loves. Picasso takes a new mistress, the Yugoslav photographer and surrealist Dora Maar. He comes across her in a cafe playing with a penknife. She becomes his weeping woman. Once again, Picasso evolves a new code of line and color for his new mistress. Dora Maar, all straight lines and jagged angles in hard red and black. Marie-Thérèse, all curves and caresses in soft blue and yellow. The outrageous fashions of the 30s appeal to Picasso's comic nature. They provide him with the raw materials for his extravagant portraits of costumed women. He displays a marked predilection for flamboyant hats. In Picasso's portraits, the hats become a physical extension of the sitter. Picasso adds yet another woman to his harem, Nouche Elouard, the beautiful wife of his friend Paul Elouard. Nouche is famous for her extravagant hats. In a series of disquieting portraits, Picasso combines the face of Dora Maar with the features of his Afghan hound Kazbek. His intention, he later claims, was to show the animal side of women. Has childhood ever looked so monstrous? Marie-Thérèse finally gives birth to a baby girl. Picasso calls her Maya, after his own dead sister. When I was their age, he remarks at an exhibition of children's art, I could draw like Raphael. It took me a lifetime to learn to draw like them. Maya strongly resembles her father. Picasso identifies with her. Picasso's own father had specialized in paintings of doves and pigeons. Maya looks more and more like a fat baby Picasso. A sadness and introspection enter his art. (1941). With the war raging around him, Picasso decides to stay in Paris. A German soldier visits him in his studio. Looking round at the dark, brooding, wartime still lives, the soldier asks the painter, "Did you do this?" "No," replies Picasso, "you did." A tribute to those who have fallen. Picasso, the wealthiest artist who has ever lived, raids his garbage heap for the materials. Out of old nails, broken jars, thrown away bicycle handlebars, scraps of cardboard, he assembles a goat's skull and a burning candle. Picasso. God is simply an artist like all the others. He invented the giraffe, the elephant, and the cat. But he hasn't got a style. He continues experimenting. Picasso. Any everyday object is a vessel, a vehicle for conveying my thoughts. Just as Christ used parables, that's the way I use objects. Out of 2 wine jugs, a wicker basket, a palm frond, some broken pottery and scrap metal, Picasso constructs a she-goat, heavily pregnant. I don't try to express nature, rather, as the Chinese put it, to work like nature. Girl jumping rope, 1950. Made out of real kiddish shoes, real rope, and a wicker basket. Broken pottery, chocolate boxes, and a cake pan. Picasso has a new mistress, the painter, Françoise Gillot. Françoise is persuaded to bear him 2 more children, the boy Claude and the girl Paloma, Spanish for dove. Baboon with Young, 1952. Picasso is 70. He has grown obsessed with his own fertility. Two toy cars taken from his children are used to make the baboon mother's head. White canvas in studio. What is left for him to paint? Picasso decides to set the bar as high as possible. He turns for inspiration to the past and takes on the old masters, reworking pictures by Ingres, Delacroix, Manet, and above all, perhaps the greatest Spanish painter, Velázquez. Picasso identifies the characters who interest him most in Velázquez's great masterpiece, Las Meninas. He's fascinated by the young Infanta. She reminds him of his own Maya. In a series of irreverent quotations, Picasso puts the rich cast of Velázquez's painting through the trials of Alice in Wonderland. You must always try to imitate someone else, but the fact is you can't. You would like to, you try, but you make a botch of the whole thing. And it's at that point where you make a botch of everything that you are yourself. Painting, art or devilry? He himself asks the question. Jacqueline Roch, his last wife, in the pose of an odalisque from Delacroix's great painting of the women of Algiers. Turban by Matisse, body by Picasso. When Matisse died, he left his odalisques to me as a legacy. Matisse, his great friend and rival, dies in 1954. When all is said and done, Picasso writes, there was only Matisse. Now he is alone, still life with Bull's skull. View of Cannes. Picasso is the best-known artist in the world, fabulously rich. He swaps a single painting for a house in the south of France. He owns chateaux and villas all along the French Riviera. Picasso used to be a great artist, complains his old friend Braque. Now he's only a genius. The bull has been tamed. Reclining nude and man playing a guitar, 1970. Picasso is 89 years old, yet he's painting more than ever. A final resting place. Behind high stone walls, security fences and guard dogs, the legend awaits its end. But there's to be one last great surprise. Picasso, the inveterate hoarder, has been saving key works for his own collection. Carting them from home to home, villa to villa, mistress to mistress, pictorial mementos. Picasso leaves his collection to the French nation. In the Hôtel Salé in Paris, the Picasso Museum sorts out the fragments of creativity. 80 years of the most powerful creative production of our times have come to an end. Portrait of the painter, overwhelmed and self-mutilated. A gardener figure with the beard of an ancient mariner in a wicker armchair against a background of wild flames. All this compels us to interpret this last portrait as that of essential solitude. But this canvas has its secret, for the strongest thing about this figure, its powerful strangeness and its almost obscene quality, derive from what seems to be an amputated hand. Picasso remains Picasso to his very last breath. He dies on April the 8th, 1973. His last recorded words are, "Painting remains to be invented."